one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, let's start out a discussion about the scoring criteria and any other topics in regard to planning. So we got several documents that board members have thrown together and Vicki has thrown together. I'm going to start with the document that I had put together and why I put it together, and then we'll go from, and then those of you who submitted a document to give you an opportunity to explain it, and then we'll get the board's general opinion about all of it. The one that I have at the top, it says project checklist. These are questions or criteria created by the U.S. Treasury's office in regard to satisfying, what the project should have satisfied, and the vast majority of it is simple yes and no. What's your thoughts on that? Is it useful? Would you add something to it? Take something away? Because here's my thought is that, once we get to the point to where we know that the applicant has satisfied all the criteria requested by the U.S. Treasury's office, you can pretty much, at that point, ask them anything, or judge them or grade them on any other criteria. This is not so much a grade as it is just to make sure that we have done our jobs.
Like a pass-fail.
Right.
So it's kind of preliminary.
Yes. So it can't be, I don't want, we don't want to get into a situation where we've cleared somebody to move on to be, or say if they're even chosen to receive monies, that only to find out later that, a couple of these criteria they didn't meet, and we just had forgotten to ask that question. Yes?
I'm going to ask just a dumb question. This is all new. Are the applications that we have, the proposals, have they already been vetted for this checklist? I just want to know, are we reestablish something that, I just want to know I guess I'm confused to see if what we're getting has already met the criteria.
I think Vic can answer, but I'll say real quickly, my understanding is the auditor's office has done an initial overview of the application, and that the request satisfies that money, that would it qualify for ARP money, that particular type of project. Am I right?
Okay, with this committee, not the other committee that you're on, but this committee, you're looking at two things. Well, you're looking at more than two things. But the basic criteria is, if we're talking about a nonprofit, is it a 501c3 or 501c19? And does the business, if it's a small business, meet the definition of a small business? Then you have to do that two-step analysis. One, was there economic harm caused or exacerbated by the pandemic? So you have to evaluate all of the proposals before this committee to determine, was there economic harm? And then two, how does that response, in other words, how is the money going to be used for? Is it related to the negative economic harm, and is it proportional? So for example, let's say a group demonstrates to you that they lost $50,000 due to the pandemic, and they're asking for $20,000. And they want to use it for operating expenses. All of that is allowed under the final rule. And to me, $20,000 is proportional to the $50,000. But what if they can't demonstrate that they lost $50,000 or a dollar amount, but they had challenges, which is also allowed in that handout that you reviewed at the last meeting? How do you evaluate that economic impact? And what if they're asking for $1 million? Is that proportional to what they were harmed? That's the evaluation that you'll have to do. Now, in terms of Are they cleared? Are they 501c3s? I have been looking through them. There's a few I have some questions about, and I think it's up to the applicants to answer, that question. There could be a reason why they're not posted yet on the IRS webpage. Or maybe they're going by a different name and I just can't find it. But there's a handful that I have questions on.
That you just simply cannot find that they're
Right.
registered as a 501c3.
Right. There's a possibility that one in particular goes under a parent organization. So, I think the applicants can answer that question. And hopefully show proof of their status.
It was kind of a question that I have, and maybe I'm jumping things here, I don't know. But a lot of these questions, like the thing I emailed a list of questions to ask, and I see a lot of them are on your chart. And if they're going to come and make presentations to us, I'm wondering, I hate for them to get up in front of us and then we throw one of these questions at them and they don't have the answer. So I was wondering, do we send out some sort of questionnaire to everybody before they appear before us and say, you're going to be asked these things, please be able to answer them, demonstrate?
We'd actually
How do you
touched
do
on
it?
that in another, one of our other committees, and I think Kurt had spoken, you had made a suggestion that I thought at the time that made sense, and was to give them a list of things that they needed.
Oh, no, what I was talking about was simply presentation materials, slideshows, et cetera, or handouts that they wanted to committee. I wasn't getting into the showing proof of certain criteria kind of thing. I was just talking about, you need to get your PowerPoint to us 2 business days before, and if you have handouts you want to bring, you need to bring enough copies for everybody in the room. That's what I was doing, Jim, as far as materials.
All right.
Commissioner Biggs, maybe one answer is that if the committee settles in on their scoring, this is what would be shared as far as what they're going to be asked. I mean, is that basically the same type of situation? We're going to be, if we have a scoring, some of these questions are on here, they'll know up front, hey, one of the things is sustainability. Has a proven long-standing track record of success. They know this committee would be looking at that, so they're prepared to answer that. That's one option.
I think that the rubrics, at least what I've seen so far, don't necessarily go down every single one of these things, and they're a little bit more vague than some of these questions are. So, I mean, we could show them the rubric too, but we might also need to give them a checklist or a list of questions in addition, would be my thought.
Well, yeah, it would be nice to get the preliminary answers first before we have them dig into some of the details.
Can I just, the way that I was reading the materials that you all were sending is that the questions, for example, that Ruth is asking, those are among the questions you'd be asking them,
Yeah.
but you would score their responses on that rubric.
Yeah.
So one of your questions is, what's your negative economic impact? And how is this loss caused by COVID-19? Those are excellent questions. Because that's one of your requirements, to find out what this negative economic impact is and to explain it and let them explain. And then on the rubric, you could say, well, I think they suffered some harm, but not, they didn't really demonstrate it. Or you could say, they really suffered harm. I'm going to give them a higher score on that question, That's how I was interpreting all the questions, or the different questions that you were giving. Ruth
Yeah,
gave
I
one.
think so. Yeah.
Rebecca had the one from Valpo. That's what I saw today.
Yeah, and then
And Commissioner Biggs had the checklist.
I just thought if they had the list of questions, kind of like what I submitted, only dressed up nicer, then they wouldn't have any surprises when they come in to do their presentation. They'll be ready with answers when we ask them that. any of those questions.
Well, we can certainly, may I see this? I mean, we can the list that you were
The
talking
list
about.
of questions?
Yeah.
Mhm.
A lot of
You
them
have it
are
right there.
covered too in this.
I mean, we can certainly get this in their hands. I mean, I don't want to get into something to where it starts setting us back in time. We're kicking meetings back because they're not ready when they should be ready. I mean, we've been talking about this for months now. And there's been ample opportunity to reach out to us if they had any questions. But I see what you're trying to accomplish here. I get that. And, I think that I would think that we can create a list, get it mailed to these individual applicants in time. But again, I'd hate to get into a situation where we start kicking meetings back.
I understand that, and that's part of the reason why I'm saying, well, maybe we should send something, we could email it to them and they'll get it right away, so that we don't get here in the presentation and they have no answer for us, and then how do we fill out our rubric, because they don't give us all enough information where they know it ahead of time. Hopefully the presentations will go more smoothly, and they won't ask for more time or something. That's all I was.
Vicki, you have an opinion on this or comment? You have an opinion?
It's really how you want to structure this, I think.
Well, I think Ruth makes an excellent suggestion. I mean, I think, look, if they've got this information, we know that they received this information, and somebody gets in front of us and we ask that one of these questions and they don't have an answer, then it's at that point, and for them, I don't want to get into a situation where I don't have that information. I'd like to bring it back to you.
Right, exactly.
That's why you send this out ahead of time.
Right. I will get, if we can agree, if you wouldn't mind, Vicki, looking at this,
Oh, I did, yeah.
and making sure if you got any suggestions
If
of any
it's correct.
changes, you or Scott, or any, and I will get this put into an email and sent out all to the applicants tomorrow.
I would like to say on a quick list of looking at your spreadsheet and her questions, all of her questions from 1 through 12 are covered in the
Covered on it?
spreadsheet with the exception of number 3. So this is a,
Well, they're
it looks very
renumbered,
similar.
so, yeah, I know.
Well, the one I have,
Which
sorry.
one are you,
I'm looking the one that you emailed out.
there's like A, B, C, and
Yeah,
every one
D,
of them
sorry,
starts
D 1
with-
through 12.
Oh, D,
I see
okay.
covered pretty much in there with the exception of 3, so I think it'll be pretty easy to mesh these.
Rebecca, could you go over what you just said? I'm lost with what you
Oh,
said.
sure.
Okay.
Commissioner Biggs had the spreadsheet he gave out, the yes or no, and then Ruth had the questions.
Checklist.
Yeah, the checklist, but her questions D 1 through 12 are also covered in this checklist.
I did see a lot of that.
Yeah, so it'll be easy
Very,
to.
yeah, because those come from the steering committee's
Exactly.
guidelines.
Right.
What the steering committee said they're going to give priority treatment to. Oh, it's okay, yeah. Whereas,
A, B, and C I took from the law.
Yeah, that's why we know.
A, B, and C you took from the law,
The rule,
the rule.
well,
Yeah, that's where the
Final
ones
rule.
that are more unique compared to the checklist.
and again, B and C in my mind are really important because for this committee, you're trying to establish what was the harm and how is this federal award going to address that harm?
Okay, I think we're on to something here now.
Yes.
Now, question is, do you want me to take care of this, getting it into an email? Structuring it as an email? Or would your office, or would you care to do that?
Do we want all these questions? The only question I would say, number 2, That can pretty much be defined ahead of time.
Their status.
I'm going to give you the list of your proposals, and you'll see pretty clearly which ones are businesses, and then they'll have to prove that they're a small business, and which ones are nonprofit.
And we'll know they were in existence prior to the pandemic as well?
Well, that's a question.
Yeah.
That's a question.
Okay, that is a question to keep in. Okay.
So, you know, why don't we go ahead and leave two in, it, you know, just for the email? Vicki,
Yes.
if nothing else for our, you know, because I know somebody's going to ask that question when they get in front of us, or something, you know, similar to this. I don't know, you know, we can leave it in or we can take it out. I don't know.
Which one you're?
Number 2,
A2, you're talking about?
yes.
A2, okay. And I know this probably isn't the best format. When I was doing this, I was just trying to start from somewhere and make an outline of all the requirements that are in the rule. Kind of for our purposes, that if we asked them these things, you know, I have a little line like, oh, we can check off which category they're in, that kind of thing.
Well, I like it because every applicant's going to be asked the same question.
Right.
Exactly.
And we don't, you know, that way we don't run into, well, you didn't ask the, you know,
Yeah, they're
the
treated the
applicant
same.
before us. Everybody's treated the same. So answer? Are you about getting this,
What-
yeah, laying this out in an email and giving it to the applicants?
Certainly, we can do that. I can send it when we ask them to schedule their date for their presentation.
Perfect.
Okay, so it's just this one that we're,
But there's two sheets here.
correct, it's just this list of questions.
Yes.
Okay.
1 through, yeah.
Did you just want to do A, B, and C, and then are you going to send them your project checklist for D? Or, since my D is pretty much your project checklist.
I'd send it all in an email.
Just combine the two, meld
Combine
the
the
two.
two, that way, when the question's asked, is this a one-time expense, they know the question was coming. See what I'm saying, Ruth?
Yeah.
The
You
whole
mean, you
purpose-
just want to do both of them, and just like you're putting them all together? You're not trying to merge it
No,
into
I'm
one?
not.
Numbered list
No, just
question.
this is all it's gonna be
Oh,
emailed.
just this, okay.
Just this,
Oh, okay.
yes. The whole purpose of the email is to inform them, here's what you're going to be asked, be prepared to answer it.
Right.
Okay, so we'll just meld it into one. I'll need yours, Jim. For some reason, I don't have yours. I know you showed it to me. It's really just the steering committee's guidelines, but
Exactly.
just to make sure that it's, yeah, okay.
You can have it.
Okay, great. So we'll meld this, but with question 2, are you okay, sort of, because when you read their applications, it asks, are you a nonprofit? Are you
Gotcha.
for-profit? Are you a government entity? It kind of answers that. So we could take off the number 2, it's already answered.
Okay.
Okay.
But are they demonstrating they're a small business according to the rules that define what a small business is? Like
Again,
under
I feel
500
that they need to address that before you, because
Well, they do, yeah, but I mean, are they going to? Do they know they need to? I guess is the question. Because that's why we're giving them these questions.
Well, perhaps.
If you take it out, then they won't.
Yes, there's only 2. Well, one is in either category. So there's either 2 or 3 for-profits, and basically, they will have to address that they have fewer than 500 employees, or that they are not essentially like a chain, that they are not the primary leader in their industry.
But they're addressing that in the application.
They did not, I don't think that they addressed that in the
Okay?
application.
And I think that's what Ruth's saying, is that's why it's probably important that it's asked in the
Okay.
email.
We could ask, how about this? We ask, do you meet the definition of a small business?
Fine, yeah.
And then maybe when they come up here, you could ask them, how many employees do you have? And if they say 1,000, which I really don't think that any of these do. I think it's pretty clear.
No, I think
So
we,
you think it's pretty clear that all the applicants have under 500 employees? Is
Yes.
that- Okay, and then they'll qualify by that. We won't have to look at the small business administration then.
So what we could do is we could meld these two together and then send it out when we ask for scheduling of their presentations.
good. And the purpose of the email, just so everybody understands, is to let the applicant know, be prepared to answer these questions.
I think I might send it out right away. I don't know. I have another question that might impact your sending it out, and that is, are we going to try to have sort of like entities do it on the same night? You know, like we hear from all the small businesses on one night, and we don't have as many of those probably as nonprofits. And
I can.
are we going to try to kind of group them so we're kind of hearing like proposals together so they don't get so separated out?
Is this all?
And if so, then do we want to tell them when
all the
to
same?
appear instead of asking them when they want to come?
Let me
I don't
address
know.
how I did this with the other committee. Because of the timing, we set how many meetings? 4 meetings, I think 4. And what I did was I asked them, what dates are you available? And if you have a preference, order your preferences. One of the dates is already taken up. Another date has almost taken up. So this is just for the expediency, because, you know, there are people who might have things going on.
Right.
So it's up to you if you want to request the like, but when you look at the list, you'll see that there's only a handful that are considered small businesses,
Yeah.
and there's a handful that could be considered impacted industries, including tourism or nonprofit or business. They kind of can go into different categories.
Okay.
So in a sense, this is all your committee. You're looking at all of these entities, so it's up to you if you want to group them. Most are nonprofit, though.
I just wanted to raise it. I didn't, whatever you want to do.
I think the way they're laid out right now is fine with me.
Yeah, looks good.
Yeah, if they can go in that order. Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
If we go in this order. Start with small business and just work our way down to nonprofits.
If that's the way they can be scheduled.
I gave it one last.
Okay, any more questions? All right, let's talk about the actual scoring formula. We've had a week or two to think about it. How do you all think that should take place? Point system, A, B, or C, 1 through 5, 5 being the best.
Is this our final draft on the scoring recommendation?
That's just a talking. They're all just drafts.
The
to
point
talk.
system?
Yeah, no, this is just an idea thrown out by Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah,
No,
this one is.
The rubric?
This is the one I threw
vertical.
out there.
Okay.
That's Rebecca's idea.
That's more of like point-based, based on numbers, not necessarily, that was like, how do we quantify economic harm? Do we want to do it by lost revenue? Numbers like that.
Right.
Instead of like, they request clearly. Well, clearly is kind of subjective, so that's where this is, again, just a start. and my thoughts, that's all.
And then this horizontal one is one that Vicki put together as a draft. Is this one, is the
Okay,
one Vicki put
that's this
together?
one, yeah.
Yeah, and that, you said you were kind of going off of what another subcommittee was doing.
Right. And I gave you copies of what the other subcommittee looked at. Those were two other scoring rubrics that they looked at. And I didn't give a copy to Commissioner Biggs or Councilmember Bricker because you already looked at that last week. But it's that gray sheet. One was put together by a council member, the other one came from the Community Foundation. And so the discussion last week was to try to meld the two together. And then I slightly adjusted it for this committee to include what you need to look at, economic harm and the response. That's the requirement. So the other committee has a very similar one, but they are not looking at economic harm. You're looking at economic harm.
Where is that on here?
The second one.
Oh, okay. All right.
And so then, Rebecca, you're addressing economic harm in actual quantitative terms.
Yes.
Yes.
And I grabbed some of that from the VIBE grant from Valparaiso when they did that. They did a lot of those points based on revenue that was lost and things like that. But I'm assuming that would go after we know they could meet the project checklist and the questions that were sent out.
So we're looking at these two different options then.
There's nothing wrong with mixing them.
Yeah, I actually like this.
I have a question about, on Vicky's form, the topic of collaboration. Is that something that we are really looking for? Is it necessary that the applicant is collaborating with some other entity?
That's really up to you, how you want to
Well,
evaluate these.
I
In the
know.
other committee, collaboration was an issue that they wanted to include.
I'm not sure if that's
Yeah.
important for us. What if it's a small business? They
Well,
wouldn't
then-
necessarily have to collaborate.
We know how you'd score it then, don't we, Ruth?
Well, yeah, but if we have something down here in the left-hand column that's maybe not necessarily an issue, so it doesn't count, then you give it a 0, then their total score is gonna be lower than everybody else, and when it probably shouldn't be, because for some groups, maybe that's an issue, but for other
Is there anybody here
applicants,
that
it's not an
thinks
issue.
collaboration is important in this particular?
Well, as I was reading through some of the proposals, the way they are written, not to divulge too much, but there are some groups that are working together currently and in the past with other groups that are showing evidence-based practice and some data showing some success. And they have it in their proposal. And there are some groups, some of these are kind of standing alone, but they're doing similar work, not exactly the same work under nonprofit. And so when I was reading those, I said, well, this kind of makes sense. They're already kind of collaborating with some of these other existing organizations, and they're showing some success. I don't know if it's 100% fair for some of the smaller nonprofits, but I still think that, I mean, we can score, you know, a 1 or a 0 all the way up to, I mean, it depends, I guess, on how we score that.
Yeah.
But I kind of looked at that as some value, in my opinion.
To give you an example, Ruth, and like Mike, without, divulging too much, is that, the county right now is doing a comprehensive needs assessment on mental health here in Porter County. And part of what she's finding is the lack of collaboration. And where that is not, it's to our detriment that it's being done that way, countywide, that there's not enough collaboration, there's not enough talking, communication, and organizations working hand in hand, to make sure there's not a duplication of services, or if there are, that information shared from one organization to the other. When somebody comes in and says, hey, I need to talk to so-and-so, well, he's not available, he's not taking any more clients, but contact this person, blah. A lot of that's not going on evidently. So, I mean, I see why it's in there. I think, as far as the importance of it, in regard to some of this other stuff, yeah, I think you can question that, but I think it is important. That's my feeling.
I can see that it's important, probably, maybe with a lot of the nonprofits, but maybe we need to have a slightly different rubric, do you think, for small businesses? Because
Sounds like something we could just take out for a small business. I mean, I don't think,
Yeah. Affect the score number.
I mean, a couple of these aren't, they're not gonna be looking for, other, someone else's help. So, and I mean, I don't think it's gonna matter if we drop it down 50 out of 50 for a small business and 60 out of 60 for nonprofit.
Yeah.
So we'd have two different rubric sheets, depending, one for small business, one for nonprofits?
Well, I'm just looking for a way to not penalize an entity for not collaborating when, in their instance, it's not necessary, that's all.
I guess one of my questions too is, if we're talking about matching funds, if 7 through 10 points, it says applicants have commitments in place to leverage. Well, how are we gonna decide whether it's 7 or it's 10? Like, are we gonna do something to quantify so we have measurable numbers?
Right.
That was mainly my concern with, like, obviously this is probably overkill, but that's just how I roll. But I just want to make sure 7 through 10, it's clearly defined. It's not just us picking a number
Right.
between 7 and 10.
And that 7 to 10, 4 to 6, 1 to 3, that came about because on one of the other rubrics, it was a set number. And
Oh, yeah.
a suggestion was made that there be a range. So let's say, so the way I'm interpreting this, if I were sitting in your shoes, I would say, well, this box is how I feel relates to the applicant most, but I only moderately agree with it, so I would give them a 5. Which statement best meets, it's very subjective. It's how
Yeah,
you're
that's where I
going
have
to
a problem.
evaluate.
Like, I don't want to have
You
it based
want
on how I feel.
quantifiable. Well, let me tell you, I think some of the applicants will, I really, like you said, I don't really want to say too much, but they might be able to lay out exactly how much money they lost, and they'll
Okay.
tell you why.
Okay.
Maybe
I
it was
get these questions
because of reduced memberships or increased cost. Some maybe
Okay.
didn't even really have a financial loss, but they're having challenges keeping up because of the pandemic. How do you measure challenges? So
Depends
it's
what
gonna
the
be
challenges
subjective.
are.
Correct. So how do you
So if like
quantify
suddenly a
the-
homeless shelter has, a strong uptick, at least they could measure that though and give the numbers.
Right. Because conceivably, they may not have actually lost any revenue,
No, but they.
but they worked their tails off during COVID
Yeah.
to keep up with the need.
Okay.
And that's why they're asking for economic assistance. Maybe you don't think that that should qualify. Maybe you just want to see the hard losses of dollars. That is entirely up to you. Remember, Treasury says you can measure this with a great degree of flexibility. You can look
Yeah.
at how many people they laid off. Some groups may not have laid off anybody. So is that fair to require that they show how many people they laid off?
It's just another thing in the point system.
Correct, exactly.
Yeah. So some might not really be able to quantify it, and then how would we fill that out? Right. If you have to come up with a number. They might not have recognized losses because they laid off a bunch of people, so they could meet all their payroll or whatever.
But that would still count as a point loss if they lost a percentage of staff or had to lay them off. I would think that would count for something, even if they didn't lose.
Yeah, you've got a category for.
Yeah. That's where you can't necessarily, it's not just revenue loss, there's a lot more to it. So,
And they could have had revenue loss, lost memberships, lost fees, but their expenses went way up because of their increased
shipping,
costs.
all that, yeah.
And so they still had a bottom line loss,
Mm-hmm.
but they still kept up their memberships.
Had an increased cost section too.
So there's different ways of measuring it.
Exactly.
Another question is, what if their costs went up, but that's because they gave everybody a big raise?
Right?
So is that really economic harm?
No.
No, but that would probably show in their staffing numbers as well, if they didn't lose any. Or, oh, actually, they could lose and then give them all fat raises. Interesting.
Well, I would hope that by the time they're getting it in front of us, they've taken the time to fill out these applications and to track
Sure.
what we're doing up here, that they understand that, you know, what we're trying to accomplish here. And, you know, I mean, my personal opinion is you come up, if you're coming up here, you know, for some money because you've given out employee raises to try to make up that difference, you're coming up here for the wrong reasons. I personally want to see, how did this pandemic affect your business? You know, whether, you know, the loss or, you know, whatever it was. And, you know, and demonstrate that. You either can or you can't do that. I mean, we can have, you know, 10 of these sheets, scoring sheets, if you really want to, but I think what's going to happen here is, as this starts to roll out, you're going to see who did their homework. And you're going to see, it's going to be crystal clear who's really in need of this money and why. And it's directly related to the pandemic. It's not related to, well, I understand you're giving away some money and I thought I'd just ask for some. That's how I think, that's what I think is going to happen here. So what we need to do here is we need to finalize, and I'd like to do it in this meeting, is to finalize, you know, the scoring process here. You know, what information criteria are we going to use here? I do like what Becky has, or Vicki has thrown together, and I also like what Rebecca has thrown together. And we're using your information in the email. We're sending that out. Your thoughts? You want to combine the two somehow, or?
Yes, but I would like us to focus more too, when Vicki pointed out we really need to focus on the economic harm and response, we might need to look a little bit deeper and drill down into the response section to make sure it really is, and it's applicable, it is responding to that harm. Because you never know if they were like, well, you know, I just want to go on vacation. Not that anyone would ever ask that, but we want to make sure that we would want to make sure that response is definitely in correlation to what that nonprofit or small business is doing, and it's, you know, it's what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, it'll be golden if they fit into one of these enumerated projects. And if they don't, you know, we can kind of take that as an idea of what is
Okay.
acceptable when evaluating something that isn't enumerated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that is covered good under B at least.
And I think under the description of the proposed project, I think that's how Vicki has this in the 7 to 10 point category. The project's clearly an enumerated use in the final rule, and in the 4 to 6, it could be made, a justification could be made that it complies. That's when it's not enumerated, but that doesn't make it any less justified.
Yeah.
We just have to make sure they come up with the reasoning.
And I guess what would make it questionable? Because it's either going to fit in that or it won't, correct?
Yeah, it's not enumerated, and it doesn't seem like that they've met their burden of proof. I'm wondering when we need to give points to something. Do we need to put in there, maybe under matching funds or something, that they haven't received funding from any other COVID programs or gotten ARPA assistance, like say from the city as well? Isn't that gonna go into
Isn't
our,
that on the questionnaire?
it's on the questionnaire, but if we're filling out the rubric, if we're just going by this, or are we gonna go by the rubric and their answers? What's the steering committee gonna look at? Just the final score number
Yes.
on the rubric?
No, whatever this subcommittee sends to the steering committee will be the score that we're looking at.
Okay, so we can send them both the answers to the questions and the rubric.
But they're gonna, the steering committee wants them right.
And not to harken back to my spreadsheet again, but that was one of the things, because from the VIBE grant, they were very strict on, have you received any monies yet? And then they gave you a point system based on how much you actually received prior, and then they did it separate. And whether it was the state, whether it was SBA, and they did a bit of a point system based on that.
So question, was it advantageous if they received other assistance, or was that viewed as they haven't received other assistance, so they need our assistance more?
Yes, that's what they did. If you didn't receive any, it was like 3 points. If you received some, it was 2. You know, if you received 2 or more PPP and EIDL, then you only got 1 point.
And then there's another train of thought that being able to have matching funds is a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
And being able to fundraise on your own is a good thing, because we want to leverage
yeah.
as much other funds as possible.
But that wouldn't necessarily be the PPP loan.
Okay, oh, you're strictly
I'm
talking
strictly
about other
talking about
federal
that,
grants.
not matching funds. That's a
That's true.
completely different
Okay,
thing.
good, Good, okay.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing.
Okay, matching funds is a good
Yes,
thing.
matching funds,
Other
50%
federal COVID
was
help
at least
is
3
Not a
points
good
on
thing,
mine.
because you've already
Yeah.
been helped.
Okay, so then somehow maybe that needs to work its way into our scoring rubric.
So, Vicki, could you take and add that category?
Other COVID-19 assistance.
Yes.
Didn't we say, or didn't you say last meeting that if they had assistance before, they weren't qualified?
I didn't hear that.
I did not hear that.
No?
Just that we wanted to know, you know?
Yeah.
Was that talked about, Vicki? I don't recall, but,
It's in there in your,
I thought it was in
what you
the
call priority
slides.
considerations. Your general priority
It
considerations.
was- Yeah, the priority considerations, the steering committee wanted to know how much other COVID relief you've received. For example,
Yeah.
let's say that
But it didn't kick them out.
it didn't kick them
well,
out.
that's the
It's just a
question.
consideration.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's say that there's an applicant that can prove economic harm, but they've already recovered it through, let's say, Small Business Administration, the payroll protection plan, which was open to small businesses and nonprofits. They've already recovered all their economic harm through that program, but now they're coming here. That's one thing that they wanted to ask.
And the reason why it doesn't have a finer point is it depends on how much and from where the other assistance came from. So if the assistant came from another municipality and it, from your estimation, made them whole, if I'll use that term, then obviously that would have would affect your scoring. If they got assistance from somewhere else and it was lack of a better term, a drop in the bucket, then it may just be, they have a large need, they got a small portion there, that may be viewed as a good thing, because some of that lifting went away. So that's why it all depends, that's why we asked if they got it and from where, so that it can be part of the evaluation when they're doing their presentations for the subcommittees to score. Because until you know what they've received, you don't know if it's going to change your opinion on the ranking of their request.
Sounds good.
And we're only talking about funds directly related to the pandemic.
Correct.
If they've received funds due to the pandemic, either, something of a loss or damage, whatever it was. But we can add that category. And the category down here for collaboration, if there's something on the side here that nonprofits only,
Okay. So would you want to replace a category just for small businesses or just take that out? And then they would have a different scoring system?
well, I don't know who brought it up here. I mean, if you're not judging small business on it, that's a point they're not going to get over a nonprofit. So we need to come up with some other question where there's some point that can be gotten from that point, you know.
Judge them out of 50.
Yeah. And I've read all
Easier
three
said
of the
than done.
small business ones, so, yeah, I don't, they're very different. What would be a good thing to throw in the
Well,
businesses?
before you did that, my suggestion, just for discussion, would be maybe we don't, what do we have here? How many are these total?
60.
I don't know, how many,
How many categories?
26 or so,
Oh.
25, 26? Maybe it's,
Proposals, yeah.
I'm not, I mean, just for conversation, maybe the non-for-profits get ranked, the impacted industry tourism gets ranked, and the small business gets ranked. Because I'm not really sure how you're gonna mesh those three together. Because
In the
otherwise-
category of collaboration,
On all together.
over
Because
any of these
small-
categories.
Because small business really is much different than nonprofit, and I'm not sure that, I mean, tourism isn't gonna have collaboration either, not necessarily, depending on exactly what they're doing. Because under the impacted industry for tourism, well, you're looking at one of the applicants there, I mean, one of them's the conservancy. That's not a right area, right, for collaboration with other.
It's not a traditional conservancy the way that you might be thinking.
I get it, but, because maybe you end up with, this is the 1 through how many non-for-profits in rank, these are the 1 through 2 or 3 on small business, and this is the 1 through 5 on impacted tourism. Is it, what you're dealing with is the difficulty of trying to mesh them all together into one rubric.
Or we could maybe put collaboration as a sub-part under one of the other categories, like maybe it could fit under sustainability because it's related and you could use it in terms of granting points in the case of a nonprofit towards sustainability because, you know, if you work together with other people, it may be, you know, a better long-lasting thing. But you don't use it, you don't consider it for a small business or an impacted industry.
So you're saying combine those two?
Yeah, and
So
just
we
make it
end
be
up
a
with the same
consideration.
points, but if you don't think that that applies, you could still evaluate it that
Yep.
high because it doesn't really apply, but you
Yeah.
have these other points that you can give the higher point to.
Yeah, like
Higher
maybe you
points,
could
okay.
combine sustainability and collaboration. That's the only one I can think into one category. So you can pick your points that you pick the things you want to give points to.
Aye.
Chairman.
Sorry.
I'm just going to, just for discussion, and just my personal thought on how we move forward, I think the simpler and more that we can keep this, the easier it's going to be for all of us to be able to navigate through this process. I think if we have a variation, too many variations of a scoring system, it's going to be confusing, it's going to be messy. And I guess, you know, again, just to share with the group, you know, I keep thinking, I mean, this group has asked, what, 23 million about? And this is a competition for funds. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to get something. You know, they are competing for 23, we have a big pot, well, you know, 20-some million, but they're competing for 23 million just in this category. And I guess, you know, just the way I'm kind of looking at this, I keep thinking that, you know, there are some of these people who might have a good cause, but they're not going to receive any money. This is a competition for these funds, and I think that what we're going to try and listen to, at least I thought, is these presentations and reading the proposals on who meets the big picture, you know, the totality of the big picture, countywide, you know, hitting some of these key points on affected by COVID and so forth. I mean, this is just me sharing with the group. You know, I think that the easier we can make the scoring, it's going to be less confusing for everybody, and somehow because it's going to be subjective no matter how we score it. I think that's, because we're all going to have our ideas. I mean, they'll hit some of these and we can score some things, but there might be some of these businesses, small business, nonprofits, that won't meet any of these categories just because it's not their fault. They're asking for money, but I don't know how we're going to be able to accommodate the different scenarios. I'm just throwing it out there for the group to think about.
Well, I mean, yeah, Mike, I mean, there's some that said you know, it's to our disadvantage making this too complicated, getting too deep into the weeds with it. And I don't want to say simple or easy, but I mean, we can keep drilling down here as far as you want to go, and at the end of the day, what we're going to find out, I'm telling you, is many of these organizations here, or many of them, you're familiar with. You probably, you may even, some of us may even supported them in the past with either our own personal funds or whatever, that we know we have a lot of information on these because they've been around the community for a very long time. You may have a special place in your heart, and because you're human, you're going to score that way, as long as they meet the general criteria. I just think that we can get too finite here to where, I mean, we're not going to hit everything. You can't. Because these businesses are too different, these organizations are too different from one or the other, and, you know, the general questions need to be asked, common sense needs to prevail. Everybody was put on here because you're asked to be, and you qualify because you're smart enough to be sitting up here. You know, so I don't know. I think the question of collaboration as it applies to small businesses, that question was a solid question. You know, how do they prove that, or why would they? Because they're a small business. Why would they collaborate with other businesses? I don't know, but I can bet you that there are small businesses in Porter County that did collaborate with other small businesses during the pandemic. But there's some that wouldn't. You know, why would a dry cleaner do that? I don't know. But I want to make sure that we don't get ourselves in a situation to where when we start receiving these applications, start scoring them, we're not being consistent with our scoring, and we start to veer off the road here with some of them, and get to, you know, start asking tougher questions of certain ones over other ones, and not just keeping with what's on paper, asking the questions, they either answer them or they don't answer them, and we move on. Because they're actually going to be, every one of these applications are going to be vetted at least 3 times by county government. Once by the auditor's office, once by a committee like this one, and once by the Board of Commissioners, actually 4 times, and then once by the county council. So,
Steering committee.
Steering committee.
well, when I say that, yeah, steering committee, yeah, 5 times. So, you see where I'm going with it?
I could keep drilling down for 50 pages on points like this, so I can understand trying to keep it more simple. I'm come from the background of spreadsheets and numbers, so I try to keep anything subjective out of it, and that's where this comes from. But I do believe you are correct. There's always going to be a little bit of that in there. I can just use my numbers and go through this
Well,
one
and
too.
to say something I said at the last committee meeting, these are a lot of well-known names, and you guys are going to see
Yeah.
a lot of really good presentations, and you're going to hear a lot of real need, and unfortunately, however you want to look at it, this committee's going to have to get into you're an A and you're an A minus, and you're a B plus. And I tend to agree that we're not going to be able to get it down to a pure scoring method that works out that, okay, you're a 68.2 and that means you're the top one. But I guess to some extent, again, not to be easy, but you know, you have these basic parameters that you know that these are important, okay? But you guys are going to come up with questions as you sit here, as the presentations happen, and as the presentations progress. Because, you know, like I said, there's 25, 26 here. You know, there's going to be, at some point, even in the midstream, you're going to say, well, look, I didn't know that we were going to get 10 people or 10 applicants and we're all going to knock this one to a 10. You know, I've got 5 things in my head and they're all 10s. You're going to have to figure out a way to differentiate them. So there is going to be some level of you know, subjectiveness to it. I mean, we may not all like it, but this isn't, you know, this isn't finite math class, so we're going to have to get there. And I think, to Mr. Bricker's point, there's $23 million of requests. Clearly, we're not handing out $23 million out of this one committee. So there's going to be those A's and A minuses, and we're going to have to get there that way. But I do think we need something. Okay, we obviously need, you know, maybe it's something of a combination of a couple of things, but I don't think we're going to be able to get it down to exactly.
Can I throw something out following
Sure.
Attorney McClure's comments? Everyone, all of you are going to be evaluating these proposals from your own perspective. Is it fair to think that some of you are going to give a different point system based on what you think is important? In other words, let's say Rebecca wants to see actual quantitative loss of dollars. So you might be more prone to giving a 10 to somebody, one of these categories, the economic harm category. You might give 10. Somebody else might say, well, this entity really didn't lose any dollars, but they really worked hard serving the county's population because of whatever they do. And I think that that's an important challenge, and they should be awarded. So you may not know where you're coming from versus where you're coming from, and you may give a 10 to somebody, and you may give a 10, but for different reasons.
Oh, that
So
makes
is it
sense.
fair to say you each have your own individual scoring rubric that kind of feeds into the main scoring rubric? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
my reason for
Because-
giving a 7 might be different for her giving a
Right.
7.
Right, and I don't know if
But it
anyone's
doesn't
going to
mean it's
ask you
But I
to
think,
explain
to
it. I
Vicky's
don't think-
point, is that we're trying to give you a little bit of latitude that everyone's different. But Eric's 5 may be Jim's 7, but we're still not Eric's 2 and Jim's 20.
Yeah.
Still within a range. You know, that's how I think some of it gets not to be as potent as having everyone have their own way of doing it.
So this
Because-
is like a scoring guide with a range. Yeah.
I mean, you know, if you look at this list, I mean, there's no doubt, I think Scott had touched on it. I mean, some of them are going to put on fantastic presentations. Simply because some of these people put on these presentations were actually hired to put on these presentations, you know, in these companies or these organizations. And other ones are going to be, you know, less polished. But we know, listening to them, that there was a real loss here. They did play a role. They're whatever it was, and but they're just not going to be as professional laying it out in front of us. That's where through our questions we need to determine that, because you get into the Boys and Girls Club, the VNA, you know, some of these other ones, I mean, these are legitimate organizations, they do a lot of good. So, some of these other ones I've never heard of, but that doesn't mean they haven't done a lot of good, so. So I think they're, you know, going back to what Mike has stated, is that keeping it somewhat uncomplicated is going to be to our advantage. And I hate to use the word simple, because there's nothing simple about this, but less complicated streamlined is going to be to our advantage, especially listening to so many of these presentations. Well, we can really get lost in this thing. So going back to the rubric, Vicki, we'll have one for nonprofits and one for businesses. And you know, a sheet for nonprofit, a sheet for businesses. As an example, collaboration wouldn't be on the small business ones.
Okay.
Could be replaced, you can replace it with something or just leave it out.
Matching funds probably isn't in the small business one.
Yeah, there you go, whatever, matching funds.
So maybe we could adjust the vote, the scoring process to end up with the same number, but just beef it up a little bit? Each of the categories? So remove matching funds and collaboration for the businesses. Now, what if there is a business that has some collaboration? They could maybe bring that up and
Sustainability.
get bonus points.
Well, I think it's safe to say that the steering committee, you know, they're going to judge small business with small business applications, their requests. I think that's fair to say that they're going to do. I mean, I'd be stunned if a small business who's made application here didn't walk away with some kind of assistance. As long as they make their case. In other words, I don't think a point or two difference between them and the nonprofits is going to make a big difference.
Okay.
So you'll come up with 2 different forms, correct?
Okay.
Have those available at the next meeting?
And you wanted the other COVID-19 assistance added at the bottom as well?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
We are also sending out the email with the notice of here's the questions that you may be asked, the information you need to be prepared to answer.
Should the question be, here are the questions you will be asked, or be prepared to have these answers? Some of them might roll it into their presentation.
Right.
I'm just thinking.
I think the smart ones would roll it into
Yeah.
the presentation.
Just prepared.
I mean, I would. Yes, either way, either roll it into your presentation, or be prepared to answer.
Okay, very good.
Any other questions in regard to scoring criteria? Nothing? Bruce thinking.
Well, these are other process questions, not the rubric. I have some other
Go ahead.
questions. That's not the rubric. I don't know procedurally, we had talked about, the rule says we can make loans or grants, and I heard some talk about, well, we don't want to get into the loan business, we just want to make grants. But I don't remember that we ever took a vote on it. Do we need to vote about that?
No, that's going to be decided by, that's really going to
It's
be
not
decided by
our-
the steering committee, I would think.
Okay, so none of that is our, okay.
And just so we know, this is not glossed over, because I don't know who's sitting out here. I mean, the reason we're not going to consider loans is that the administration of all that, the back end of it, would be a nightmare to try to manage within county government. We're not set up for that sort of thing. We're not a bank. That's why we're not going to consider it.
And see, I don't know whose bailiwick this all is either, and when we're recommending, like if the steering committee or it's the county commissioners or whatever that decide this, but when we make our recommendation, are we going to recommend a dollar amount? Like say we think should be less than what they're asking for? Do we
Yes.
address that?
Yes.
Okay. So we will just do
Yeah.
that after we've heard everybody.
Yes, I think that, and I was going to touch on that tonight, is that we will have one final meeting where we're going to pull everything together before it's sent off to the steering committee. And that is, who do we, what dollar amount to each? Our golden circle, our silver circle, and so on. Just to make it a little bit easier for the steering committee to decide, because and they're going to need that kind of help. Because, look what we're doing.
Right?
Everything is going to be flush to them. And so if we pare it down and give good reason why, we've scored our applicants the way that we have, that just makes it easier for them. Because that is going to be a monumental job. All applications being filtered to this steering committee, and then them having to make the decision.
And also, are we just...
That's why I didn't volunteer for that board, by the way.
Are we going to just rank all of them regardless of whether they're a nonprofit or small business, 1 through 10 or whatever? Or are we going to say, oh, we'd like to see each category that's of applicant get some money?
No, I didn't thought about it, but I don't think a nonprofit carries any more weight than a business, or a business carries any more weight than a nonprofit. What you're doing and how you're serving the public and the losses you incurred, that's what's going to make a difference. And to me, it doesn't make any difference how big you are, whether you're a private business or whether you're a nonprofit. I think it's going to be, it should be pretty evident, who is really, during this whole pandemic, who really took it on the chin, and who really played a pivotal role in helping us get through the pandemic. I just think that's going to be pretty evident once these applications get in front of us, start talking.
Okay. I think that's all.
That's all?
I had. Thank
And
you.
on that point, I need to know what category they're in when we report to U.S. Treasury. And I didn't know if that would be a concern for you. But if you do look at some of the first few that I have listed, for example, I don't want to name names, okay? But number 3 could be considered a small business, or it could be argued it's part of tourism. The next few are all nonprofits, but the proposal falls into the tourism category, or it could be argued that they're a tourism entity. So they kind of straddle both. And so if you were going to rank by that, you would have to decide which category to throw them into. You know.
Ooh, that leads me to a question.
Yes.
So when we're asking and people are saying that they had a certain amount that they lost, are we looking at specific years or specific date ranges?
Okay. The way that the revenue loss category, and I know that's not what we're dealing with here, but they use 2019 as the baseline.
That's
The
what I thought.
pandemic hit in 2020. So the baseline is 2019, and you compare it to 2020.
Okay.
Now, you're also allowed to look at 2021 because pandemic continued. Is it still continuing in 2022? There's fallouts from that. So again, my answer is, it's up to you how you want to
Okay.
evaluate this. But I'm just telling you that for the
Baseline.
most part, the baseline year is 2019. That's pre,
2019.
there's no question that was before the pandemic.
Yes.
2020 hit.
In February.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the SLFRF allocations, actually, the beginning time period recognizes the impact from the pandemic, so.
Scott?
I just want to say it, I've said it one way, but I want to say it again, just so that everyone, it might help or it might not, but, there's $23 million of requests here. We, as we sit here, have no idea if this area is going to end up with $6 million allocated to it, or $15 million allocated, or $20 million allocated to it. So, I don't want you to necessarily be digesting this list as how do we spread it around, for lack of a better term. It's really about getting the absolute best to the top of the list that's going to fit the category and the biggest population areas, et cetera, that, because ultimately it's not going to be, we sent you, let's say we sent 3 lists, and because we wanted those numbers haven't been set because we didn't know how much the request was going to be. So what was it, like 50?
About 53.
53 million of requests. So my point is that it's really about, what's the old saying, the cream rises to the top. It's about finding the very best in here. Every committee is going to have to, as they're looking at their list, is going to be having to figure out the very best ones to put forward, because ultimately, as Commissioner Biggs has indicated, the steering committee is going to end up with all these committees' work on their desk, and they're going to be sitting in a meeting trying to, figure it out, and they're going to have more requests than there is money. So there's going to be people who get some and some that don't, and ultimately that goes back to my comment about A and A minuses. But the very best applications, after fully vetted and all that, those are the ones we need to make sure that we're able to differentiate for that central committee and why.
Right.
Because, I don't know for sure, but my guess is we're not getting the number 12. Just as a guess, on raw numbers, okay? But I don't know, it could be number 8, it could be number 16. I don't know where the cutoff will end up being. 'Cause it's all gonna depend how it ends up.
I know myself, if I were sitting on the central committee, and Mike, you can, because you're on the council, you can pipe up here too. I mean, I would really want to know from these committees, I want to know what's the best of the best. I mean, it's highly probable that every one of these has a legitimate need and showed a legitimate loss. But that is not going to help that central committee. We need to determine which are the strongest of all that will touch the most of our residents, not only next month, but years from now with this money. That's where I'm coming from. I know all of these are there's going to be many great presentations within here. But at the end of the day, to me, it's going to be, I want to know what you're going to do with the money. And I want to know how that makes, of course, making you whole or filling a void that you experience is important to me. I'm not saying that. But what's more important to me is how is this money going to help our communities moving forward? How is helping you going to help everybody else? That's what I'm going to look at. And I think if I sit on the central committee, I would appreciate knowing, I want to see the gold division, the platinum division, and the silver division. Okay. We have any more to talk about? Anybody? Yes, Kurt?
Presentations. In the last committee, you set a standard of 15-minute maximum as far as presentation. And I think that, to be honest with you, considering you have 25, 26, you don't want to go beyond 15 minutes because you're already, even if the other committee was only doing 3 presentations per meeting. If you do that, we're talking about 8 more meetings before you can even get through those kind of thing. So do you want to set that same standard here of a maximum of 15?
Scott?
I would suggest, because of the magnitude of presentations, I mean, I don't know that we're going to be able to do it in nights. I mean, I know nobody wants to give up, but it's either going to be what? I mean, the last committee was 2 a night for 3 a night for 15 minutes of presentation, 15 minutes of Q&A. Yeah, that puts us, I don't know, somewhere in October on this list, so that's pretty rough. So we have to, and again, I don't want to either, but
Set up
if it's gotta be a Saturday or a Friday or something to knock a book, because otherwise this is going to be, and the other thing is that in a perfect world, the closer these are in time to each other, the easier it's gonna be. If we get 60, 90 days out and then have to come back and try to remember it and get everybody on the same page, that's gonna be difficult. So, I don't know.
No, I agree, and yeah, you're right, there's probably gonna have to be a Saturday here, or unless, and I ask the board members this, is there a day, Monday through Friday, that you can give the entire day to, starting at 8:30 in the morning?
Commissioner Biggs?
Yes.
Doing an entire day and locking down the chambers will be a challenge to do, okay? There are very, very few days where there aren't official and legally noticed meetings that occur. And that's, especially now, that's a challenge because 102A is locked out because of early voting. So doing a solid business day could be a challenge to come up with.
Or, maybe a day is a little bit too much for everyone to swallow,
Maybe a half
because
day.
I was just throwing it as an idea. Maybe it's a half a day on a Friday morning, and we can get several done, and then, you know, like a combination of that, because, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, we could get, maybe in a half a day, we could get, 6? But, I mean, think about that, a half a day takes 6, I mean, and that's, we got 4 more of those,
Well, I can, as long as
4 total.
we schedule out a couple of weeks, I can work a half day in my schedule. That's not a big deal.
And maybe, and I don't know what everyone's availability is or predetermined schedule is, but my assumption is, and Kurt knows more about the calendar, but I would think Fridays are a little easier here.
The only thing on Fridays is, let me check, because I'm not.
Friday mornings?
Friday morning.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are always much more difficult.
Actually, Fridays are, because nobody likes having meetings on Fridays.
Including us.
Fridays seem to be relatively open, looking here at the calendar. Yeah,
It's pretty open.
yeah.
So, what's your thoughts of 8:30 to noon? Mike? On Friday? It's either that or we're gonna have to
Yeah,
start
I'm
looking
gonna-
at Saturdays.
Well, let me ask this to the group. Let's just say we did an all-day Friday. These are, and let's just say I can't be here Friday during the day. Would I be able to watch
Sure, everything here is.
these presentations?
Yeah.
Let's just say that, the 4 of you were here, I couldn't be here. I could watch the presentations, score the presentations. I'm not saying I can't work something out, it's a little challenge, but I'm just kind of putting it out there and just kind of keep it on a schedule, but not try and get all 5 of us here. I guess all 5 of us wouldn't have to be here to keep it going, and then we could watch and score. Well,
I don't have a problem with that. I don't think any rules prohibit us from doing it that way.
No, and nothing does.
Marathon.
I mean, the only thing that you wouldn't see in the videos, actually, if they're doing a PowerPoint, you wouldn't see the PowerPoint. But
You could hear the
we're
PowerPoint.
asking these committee, the groups, if they're doing a PowerPoint, we want you to bring a printout of your PowerPoint with enough to hand out to everybody here.
Right.
That way, if you go to scoring or thinking about it after the meeting, you can go back to the PowerPoint. So I will have those PowerPoints available
Okay.
if you want them.
And if they turn in any additional information, they'll bring it to the meeting so that you can read it afterwards.
Yeah.
That's only supplemental. So you'll have the application, which is already available, their presentation, and anything else,
Yeah.
PowerPoint and printout.
I mean, if you're not gonna be here and they have a handout and they, you know, as they're supposed to give me a printout of their PowerPoint, then I can just save those for you so you can have them when you watch the video. Because all these videos are loaded on YouTube, usually within 2 business days.
So we know there's Fridays open. What's the board's feeling on doing a Friday, and what's their feeling on doing half a day or a full day?
I can do a full day Friday as long as I know a couple weeks in advance.
I'm pretty flexible, I can't fire myself.
I hate to even ask, because I don't want to open up a situation that I'm not meaning to, but there's 26 applicants. Does the board have the appetite to review them and decide who gets presentations, or is everyone getting a presentation?
You mean on this list here?
I mean, again, in theory, this board could review the applications, have a meeting, review them, and decide these are the 10 that are getting presentation time. Or you can hear all 26. It's up to the board. Just throwing it out there. We have their application.
I actually kind of like that.
I do too.
That's a great idea.
But Ruth?
Well, I just don't know how, if we don't, why would we not invite them to make a presentation? Is it because we've prejudged either that they're so good we don't need to ask them anything and we want them? Or is it because, oh, we looked at it and we see they really don't qualify and we're not?
I think it's, we have the application. So we have their best foot forward right now submitted.
Okay.
Okay? I think this committee, again, the committee can decide, do you want to throw them on the desk and say, hey, look, we want to get to 10, or we want to get to 15, or we want to get to 20, and go through it that way? It's not predetermining. I mean, to some extent, you are looking at the applications in total and saying, I either don't need any more information, or I'm making a decision that I don't want to hear this one in presentation.
Yeah, so we can decide either way.
Yeah.
But if they don't hear one in presentation, they could still rate them?
Sure.
Based on the strength of their application?
Sure.
I mean, honestly, if we're going to be honest here, and we certainly should be honest, I can look at this list, and I can tell you emphatically, there's 2 or 3 on here, I don't understand why they're on there, and I wouldn't consider for a second of making this pot of money available to them.
And I'm just going back to what I was saying earlier. There isn't 23 million or close to it for this one category. So, but again, it's a suggestion. It's what the board wants to do. If you went if we're gonna go what we were talking about, then I definitely suggest some half days scheduled out and we start piling them in. Or we have another meeting as quickly as we can. Everybody has the applications and reviews them, and we sit here and have votes for how many we're going to hear, and go from there. But it's either way. I know there's pitfalls to both.
I like it. I mean, I like the idea of, getting the cream of the crop that we, as a group try and decide. And, not to take anything away from, because I've read we can read those applications and just by reading, like with Scott, by reading a lot already, it's, I wouldn't have anything else to either ask or, it's just another vetting step, I guess, in one way.
I had not considered doing it that way, but there's a part of me that says that does make a lot of sense. Look, we've talked ad nauseum about there's this much money available, there's this much request for the money available, and we already know that the vast majority of these projects are not going to get funded. They're just not.
Well, and it goes back to, because we are deciding A pluses from A's from A minuses, my suggestion's based upon the committee having the time to really be able to make those hair differences, because that's what some of these are going to come down to. But again, it's just a suggestion, because I
12
have
hours.
not read all of them, so I can say untainted that I have not read in detail every single one of these, so I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling, because again, it's based upon money and reality, that there's gonna have to be A pluses, A's and A minuses, and maybe all the A's get money, but maybe only the A pluses, because all the other subcommittees are going through the same situation. I think the other one that Commissioner Biggs is chairing, I think they almost got 10 million in requests in that committee alone. So, between these two committees, we're at 33 million.
Which is more we have available,
Right.
just the two committees.
So, I know that may not be popular with everyone, but the other side of it is that I have been on both sides, where you go and you're in almost like a cattle call, and you're rushed, and it's a long day, and things never go on schedule, and sometimes you just kind of feel like you get lost in the mix. And I've also been on the other end where not until the end do you realize that really you wasted your time from the beginning, because you just weren't, in comparison to what everyone else was presenting, your application just wasn't gonna rise to the top. So while on one hand, letting everyone have their opportunity to have their presentation is good, there's no doubt about it. To some extent too, we know as we sit here that a lot of those people aren't gonna get any money.
And we know that whatever happens, there's gonna be some disappointed people.
Oh, yeah.
And, no matter how, when this is all said and done.
Well, the applications have been turned in already.
Yeah.
So there's one layer right there for us to start with. And because it wouldn't be fair to have someone come with a presentation we know we're not going to approve anyway. That's not fair to them, and well, it's not fair to us, because if we did that, that'd be about 12 hours worth of presentations. We spread that out, it's going to be different judgment, and that's if everything runs exactly on time. And again, if we're not even going to consider it, why waste their time and ours?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, this is really not an issue of fair or not fair. I mean, we're of course we're being fair. I mean,
Yeah.
we've submitted the opportunity, or created the opportunity for them to submit applications. They have, you're right, these applications should represent their best foot forward. This is their case. So to say that, I don't think it makes it more fair that we bring them up here and they spend time rehearsing for their presentation they're going to get turned down. And I defy anybody to look at this list and tell me that there's not some things on this list compared to other things on this list that's like, shouldn't be in the same category. I mean, not category, but it should be in the same thought process, just because it's just, some of these programs are just, they're touching a whole lot of lives here in this county. And that, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but that, again, with this money, because there is limited funds, it's only going to be one time, we have to make whatever we decide, it's got to be the biggest impact and longest lasting impact. And some of this stuff, it's not going to make that cut. And I would rather review the applications, decide who we're going to interview, instead of bringing everybody up here. And it's not, look, I could care less about taking a Saturday, honestly, or, in the evenings. It's more, I don't want to create a scene up here to where it looks like, they interviewed everybody. They took all the applications, they had everybody present, and boy, and that might be fine with some people. That might be just super great with some people. But I don't think reviewing those applications, determining who we're going to review after we review those applications, interview, is any less fair than that. I don't.
And I'm not suggesting a number right now. So what I'm suggesting is, this board may end up with 22 presentations, it may end up with 8. But and none of us know that as we sit here, because that's what I think the next meeting you guys could do if you went down this route, was to go through and say, you know, how many do we, you know, because again, I'm lucky to know that I haven't read all of these, and this makes it easier sometimes to kind of theoretically talk about them. But I do know that individually, like Jim said, individually, these are all great names and do great things, okay? But in a total sitting here, and it's not just names, we'll have their application, they'll have their best foot forward, and I'm not suggesting that we pick 5 and do 5 presentations. I'm saying the board, as they go through the applications, can then decide, I'm happy at X, or I want 1 more, or I want 2 less, or whatever the case may be. But whatever you whittle down, if this board, I think, as if this subcommittee, by a majority, thinks these make up a number, aren't gonna make the cut, then, I mean, I think when you make that vote, you should be concrete enough in your opinion that basically even the wowiest, even the best presentation isn't going to necessarily change your mind because of the underlying facts.
Right.
And if a majority of you don't believe that under any circumstances the presentation is going to move you from that, then I do think we are spinning our wheels to some extent. But if that's kind of a hard line, but I would take that hard line on the exclusion from the presentation, and then it doesn't mean that everyone left is gonna, but at least we've whittled it down, and we haven't wasted any more of their time either.
Well, like you said, we could go through that process and end up, they all make the cut. We want to hear from all of them.
Good?
Or 8. But we may want to hear from all of them. What do you think, Ruth?
Well, after hearing all this, I can kind of see both sides, but after hearing all this, I think, yeah, maybe we should go through them all and whittle them down.
Well, could I suggest that you have the next meeting is scheduled next Monday, with the understanding from Commissioner Biggs that I'll probably need a few hours of comp time to do this. I can have the printed proposals ready for you by noon on Wednesday
Of this week?
of this week.
We'll start reviewing them in preparation for Monday's meeting to have the discussion
Yeah.
among the
To
committee.
have them on paper instead of looking at them online?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's what he means,
we're
printed by Wednesday to be picked up or sent out.
I'll print hard copies of every single one of the proposals. Some of them uploaded documents to accompany it. I'll warn you, there's a few that are like 50 pages long in their supporting documentation, but yeah, I can get them done by noon on Wednesday.
Okay.
If you want to come in and pick them up, we'll have them in the commissioner's office.
Okay.
Just in case you can't get here Wednesday or Thursday, we're closed on Friday. So if you don't get them Wednesday or Thursday, you're not going to get them
Out of
before
luck.
the meeting.
So just go into the front reception area where Kathy's at. She should, we'll put them out there on that table at
No.
far, no?
No, I'd like you to introduce, because I've got 4 different subcommittees that I have to sort all of these out. So I need to be very careful that you get the right package.
All right.
I'd say this
So-
one takes priority though, if they
Commissioner,
have to get it before.
I said that I would have it ready by
Yeah.
noon on Wednesday.
But I mean, I know you're getting the other committees.
I said
They
I would
can
have it
hold
done
off
by noon on
on
Wednesday.
that
I
one.
made that commitment, so.
And I also think lastly, if we do this route, everyone reads them, everyone's ready to go for Monday. Any last scoring rubric, minor tweaks here and there, I think after everyone's reviewed them, I think that would help if there is anything we need to tweak, we could be adding. Here's our scoring rubric, here's the people that are doing presentations, and because I've reviewed all the presentations, I now see that we're missing a category, or this is a category we don't need, or whatever the case may be, so that when we get to presentations, the scoring rubric is in as much as in complete form as it's gonna get, and we have our presentations, whatever, whether it's 1 or 26, anywhere in between.
Commissioner, I wanted to point out too that, I think it's great we are having presentations. Any of the PPP loans, the EIDL, all of those grants, those were application-based only. and no one had a chance to follow up with questions or anything like that. So we're not reinventing the wheel by going at it, but I think it's wonderful that we're having people come in to give more information in the presentations as well. Once we get it rolling.
And along the same note, we don't have to do what another county does.
No.
But the minutes that I gave you at the last meeting from Hamilton County, it appears to me that it was a yes/no vote based on the strength of the application.
Okay.
No means there'll be no further look at the application. Yes means the application will continue to determination of
phase.
funding
Gotcha.
allocation. So they did a cut based on the strength of their application. We don't have to do what another county does.
Yeah, I don't want to get into ranking these apps. I agree with you, Vicki. It should be a yes, no, and with a vote, and then the yeses move on to the next phase.
So at next Monday's meeting, you're going to spend your Easter weekend reviewing all the proposals, if you haven't done so already. And then Monday, you'll decide who goes forward.
Yep. We got to be here till midnight.
Any consideration of, you might want to think about how are you going to do this?
Do it.
Is it going to be, let's just go project A, or
Go
applicant
down the
A?
list.
Yeah.
A roll
Sure.
call?
And kinda take straw
Or
votes on
each
them?
one presents their top, even though there's no number
We
that
can
we're
decide
given?
that on Monday.
Yeah.
I think if we all do our homework as we should be, that we go right down the list and we vote. Every application is a vote is taken, either yes and no.
Or we might discuss, or, I mean, could we take like a straw vote and then say, you know, why do you think yes and why do you think no, and then take the actual vote?
Well, you
I
take,
kind of like to discuss.
yes, you take the motion,
Yeah,
you have the discussion,
okay,
and then you take the vote.
okay.
Okay.
Now, if I may.
Yes.
Simply because I'm managing a very crazy room schedule here. Right now, the only scheduled meetings you have coming up are next Monday and then the 28th. What I would like, or pardon me, pardon me.
25th.
Are the 18th and the 25th of April. Those are the only two meetings that we have locked out on the calendar. With your permission, and again, with the understanding that you may switch gears and do Friday mornings or whatever, I want to go ahead and lock out the May 2nd, May 16th, and May 23rd, just to have a lock on it.
Yeah.
May 9th?
May 9th, yes. There's a question, Stormwater Advisory Board meets that night. I don't want to bump them a second time because they were nice enough to accommodate us for tonight.
We are in the rainy season.
But we're working with elections to try to get them out of 102A within a day or two after the elections, so that maybe we can get stormwater to move downstairs. So I can't say anything for sure about the 9th at this point in time. But if I lock out every other Monday through the 23rd, at least we'll have that time if we need it. If we decide to do a Friday morning, and we don't need the 23rd, fine, I can release the meeting on the calendar, but it's easier to release something than to try to fight somebody for a given night. So with your permission, I will go ahead and do that.
That's fine, yes.
Lock those dates and
Yes.
times.
Sounds good.
Like you said, we can always let them go if we're going off in a different direction.
Well, basically, every open evening on the calendar between now and mid-May is marked on hold, call Kurt at extension, boom, 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 boom. Because I blocked them so nobody else can take them.
Has the other committees even met yet?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they have?
Well, yours, no, the infrastructure and public health response are meeting on Wednesday.
Yes.
For the first time?
Yes.
So we're ahead of the curve here.
Yes.
You also have the most applicants.
So we can get the,
By double.
One probably might only have one meeting.
You basically almost have, what, about 45% of all of the applications in
Yes.
your committee for 50%.
This committee,
Yeah.
isn't that special?
So, do I understand correctly that I will not send out these questions, be prepared to answer at your presentation? We'll first get through who makes the first cut,
Then we'll send out the,
and then we'll
Yes.
send it out and start scheduling.
according to who makes the cut.
Okay. Very good.
But there's going to be, you're going to be ready to read, you can ask your questions, but, read, but be ready to vote. We got to move this bus along.
Yes.
Very good. Any other questions, comments in regard to anything we talked about so far?
I
Eric?
think is the stack gonna
Been kind of quiet, Eric.
Processing.
It's just
Process.
very suspicious.
Yeah. We'll get used to it.
Public comment? Anybody like to say anything? No? Like watching paint dry, isn't it? Yeah. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Motion approved. Thank you.
Until next Monday, right?
Till next Monday.